Did you get a chance to watch the debate Thursday night between Joe Biden and Donald Trump?
Of course, I watched the whole debate for that 90 minutes.
Okay. Were you scared to death, or what? What was your reaction?
I laughed to death.
Hello, welcome to Overlap, brought to you by Wave Media. I'm Larry Johnson, and I have the honor and privilege today of conversing with Professor沈逸. Let me start off by asking about your background, because it is, I think, important for me to know your experience and why you speak English so well.
My background is very simple. I continued my studies in China, and in 1995, I entered Fudan University, and I studied international relations. After 10 years, I graduated with my PhD grade in Fudan University, and then stay at that university to become the faculty there. And my research focusing on international relations in general ways, and especially focusing on Sino-US relationships. My PhD thesis focusing on cybersecurity, the cybersecurity strategies of the United States is my PhD thesis. And after that, my research focusing on global cyberspace governance and so on. I spent 1 year postdoctoral research fellow in Georgetown University, studying their School of Foreign Affairs and the program of science, technology, and international relations and so on. So beside my research, my teaching in Fudan University, I also participated in policy research focusing on the US and China relations and writing some papers for newspapers here. And of course, to discuss Sino-US relationships, those important development in the social media represented by the Weibo in China side, and doing some video podcast in the Bilibili. It's a video platforms in China.
Okay, fascinating. For your information, my background, I was working on a PhD. I never did finish my dissertation. I was too lazy. I joined the Central Intelligence Agency in 1985 in an analyst track after spent the first year in what they call the career trainee program. That was to introduce us to all 4 directorates of the CIA. But then I started my career as the analyst for Honduras, and then later became the senior analyst for regional analyst for Central America. And this was during the wars in Central America between the Nicaraguans and the United States, Sandinista War, the wars in Salvador and Guatemala. In 1989, I left the CIA, moved to State Department, and worked in the Office of Counterterrorism. That was a 4-year experience. I then left there in 1993, 94, and started working doing consulting. And my consulting business entailed two main focus. One was on scripting terrorism exercises for U.S. military special operations forces. The other focus was me and my partners, we did international money laundering investigations. So, for example, we came up with the novel idea of doing a racketeering case against the major tobacco and liquor companies because they were involved with money laundering. They were actively working with drug cartels. So our client, one of the clients was the European Union. And so Philip Morris settled with them for $1.5 billion. I think it was 2003. Sounds like a lot of money, but turns out that was about a week of cash flow for Philip Morris. So, but they were actively engaged. I have become a political commentator. By virtue of my experience, acquired knowledge of both how the intelligence community works, particularly the CIA, both in operations and on the analytical side. I dealt with policy from the State Department standpoint, but was directly involved with transportation security, as well as international criminal investigations, the investigation of the bombing of Pan Am 103. So in a way, I bring a unique perspective because I see how the entire machine is put together. And it's not very pretty, but it's something that the average American, and I think actually the average person around the world, they really don't understand. They always make some assumptions that there is an intelligence force. And when I say intelligence, I mean somebody who's smart, who's coordinating, who knows what they're doing. And I maintain that, no, I've never seen that government. If that exists, I would like to see it. When you were in Georgetown, did you live in D.C. proper, or did you live in Maryland or Virginia? Because people who've never been to Washington, D.C., they think, oh, George, it's just all one lump. And from your own experience, it's different.
I lived in dormitory in Marion. There's a shuttle bus, the Georgetown, they have this cycle shuttle bus. So this shuttle bus will carry me from Georgetown to the dormitory where I lived. It's in Fort Meade, military base there. In the Saturday or Sundays, you can hearing that they have their drill, the cannons, some sounds like boom, boom. They will make that test or exercise in Sunday or Saturday sometimes.
I guess if you really wanted to get some exercise, you could have walked from the DoubleTree, across the bridge.
Yeah.
And climb the extra. Did you ever climb the Exorcist stairs?
Yeah, I just climbed there sometimes, but it's a little bit tough for me that time. I'm a little bit lazy. I prefer to enjoy my times, casual times.
What was the biggest both surprise and or disappointment for you in coming to the United States? Here's where I'm going with this question. I maintain that one of the biggest problems we face with international relations, and this goes to the cognitive issues, people don't understand the societies and cultures in which others live. And they form ideas that are not necessarily correct or not necessarily well informed. What was your sort of surprise about the United States, or disappointment, or either?
In the year 2008 and 2009, United States, I experienced my lives in Georgetown, and sometimes I participated in the faculty discussion or conference with the U.S. professors. And I go to the Congress to participate several hearings, to sit there as an audience to hear about the question and answers. Generally speaking, at that time, United States did not disappoint me. At that time, United States is quite familiar, like what I learned from the newspapers or textbooks or on the films or the TVs or the videos. That's the United States I already learned. But what surprised me very deeply is one thing happened about 2 or 3 years ago. I participate in a video conference. It's a conference is focusing on Sino-US relationships, geopolitical security, and so on. And during that conference, I made an argument to say that nowadays to China, we feel a little bit frustrated because the US government did not obey the guidance produced by Dr. Kissinger's and Brzezinski's on lots of issues. But when US professor told me at that conference, he said that they are not Americans, they are Europeans. I was, what? I feel a little bit surprising. He said that real United States peoples, those American peoples, did not think the thing in that way. So I think that's the shocking times. It's like a wake-up call that remind me that there's maybe I have some misunderstanding or at least the United States now is quite different comparing with the United States I remember I have in my brains. So I think that's the time that I find out it's important to have better understanding of the real life and the real thinking of these normal American peoples, which will help me to make proper or better understanding on US policies, even though such kind of policy or strategies, just like you mentioned, is just a contradict to our framework to analysis US policy and strategies, just like there's two United States in the world. One is the United States that live in our mind. The other is the United States in the real world. Nowadays, I'm clearly find out we need to gap the difference between these two United States. and to modification of analysis framework according to the real United States rather than a United States you thought to be.
Yeah, I've been stunned by the shift in both rhetoric, thought, and action in the United States from being favorably disposed towards China to now treating China as openly talking about China as an enemy. I cannot give you an explanation why in term from the standpoint of the United States. It's not like China. It'd be one thing if you did to us what the Japanese did in 1941, if you attacked and blew up Pearl Harbor. I've always amused now that one of the issues is we can't let these Chinese come into America and buy up our farmland. But yet we want Americans to be able to go into places like China and buy up property there. That's okay. So it's the double standard that I see unfolding. But from your perspective, any understanding of why there's been this shift? What's driving this shift in the U.S. attitude?
You ask a very important questions. That's also the questions confuse China research and normal Chinese peoples very, very deeply in the last I think it's since the year 2017 or 2018. Just like suddenly in one night, we just shift completely different. From China's side, actually in Trump administrations, we develop explanations. We believe a lot of scholars and research believe such kind of change is an incident, which means because Trump is so different, he is abnormal. So when he was removed from the White House, everything will change back. We will say that the Sino-US relationship, we wish it will go back to its normal track. When we talking about this, it's like we have imaginations that China and the US, their relationship have a kind of normal track. But with the attack of the stupid policies of Trump's administrations, we just leave that track. When Trump leave this office, and then our car will go back to that track. But actually, it don't happen. Biden just continue lots of these policies. And I think what stimulates China most is the rhetoric changes. It's more and more clearly that the United States use those very weird ideological terms to describe China, like name China like a communist China, talking about the so-called communist parties. It's just to create a new image of China, just like suddenly the United States find that China is red. But actually, this CPC is founding these countries in 1949, and we already developed on our diplomatic relationships for more than 40 years since the late of the 1970s. And we cannot understand why. We try to finding out some optional explanations. Maybe the United States, their governments, those political elites, they develop some rhetoric framework, try to explain to the normal US peoples why they face some problems. And this problems is produced by China, not by United States. And then by such kind of framework, they need to create an enemy. They need to transfer China from a kind of friendly, cooperative partners into a horrified, terrible enemies in the general ways. That confused Chinese people a lot. Just you mentioned, from China's side, we feel very, very weird. We did not doing those enemy-like behaviors or policies toward the United States. In quite a long time during China's open up and reform process, we believe that the United States, as a good tutor, as a good teachers, we need to learn from the United States. I think you must remember Mr. Yang Jiechi when he and Wang Yi met Sullivan and Blinken in Alaska when Biden took his office. During that negotiations, Yang Jiechi said that in Chinese, he said that 我们把你想得太好了. They say that we take too much good considerations from your side. We always take a good perceptions of your behaviors, and we tolerate you too much. we have too much expectation from your side. It's very highly symbolic moment of Sino-US relationships. From then on, China took a much more practical attitude to rebuild our perceptions toward the United States. And nowadays, China tried to take practical ways, which means we are focusing more on interest. And of course, we still have some considerations. We wish we can manage our conflict and dispute between us. And we can manage some middle or low-level cooperations when necessary. And generally speaking, China will not, we don't have this interest to have a direct conflict and a confrontation with the United States. And we still wish, try to providing some good signals which prove our that good willness. We're still looking for the potential and the possible cooperations from the United States. But frankly speaking, we got more and more disappointed. We did not got positive feedback from US side.
Right. I think I'm quite a bit older than you because I remember 1972. So I was just coming out of high school. And that's when Nixon goes to China and opens up the relationship with China and ultimately culminates with the United States recognizing the one China policy. Now, why did we do that? Well, the manipulations of Kissinger and Nixon, and then it was maintained by their successors, was to make sure that China and Russia never got together. That we kept you two apart. Even though you're neighbors, we don't want you to be friends, which is a very sort of cynical policy approach from the standpoint of the United States. And yet, in tandem with that, it then opened up this, the investment that was flowing into China, and the number of U.S. companies that started building both factories and establishing businesses. And yet, throughout this, the way I've seen the rhetoric, the public commentary shift, particularly over the last 6 years, and I think it started before Trump, is China is being described as an imperial power. And the point I always bring up, I'm going, give me the list of countries that China's invaded. Give me the list of those countries where China has launched military attacks without any necessary provocation over the last 30 years, 40 years. And yet, here's the United States with, you need a big sheet of paper, lots of room to write out the country. You go, okay, yeah, that's Iraq twice, Syria, Afghanistan, Panama, Grenada, Libya, and it goes down the list. Do the Chinese view the United States as a threat to international order, given our record?
And I think that as a research on international relations, I can understand why some people inside the United States would prefer to name China as an imperialism or an imperialist countries or empire. Because according to the so-called international relations, the realism relations, Hans Morgenthau in his very famous book, The War and Politics Among Great Powers, he defined that there are two different countries. One country named the status quo powers. These status quo powers, they prefer to keep these orders. And the other countries, he named it revisionist or imperialism or imperialist state, which means these countries, the development of these countries will changing the orders. So according to this theory, you will find that all developing countries in today's world, they are imperialist state because they all want to change the orders produced and created by the Western countries. From China's side, yes, we have different understandings or different images of the United States. In quite a long time, frankly speaking, especially after the beginning of open up and reform policies, we tried to take a more practical attitude toward the United States. First, we did not agree all US policies. we name US policy, especially those action and behaviors to invade other countries in the name of, we blame United States in the name of hegemonies. Hegemony is a negative term in Chinese cultural background. Second, in quite a long time, we try to keep a balance to deal with our relationship with the United States. Sometimes we even accept the asymmetric positions between our bilateral relations, which means in lots of times China make a compromise to ensure that Sino and US relationships can ensure in a quite stable and peaceful tracks. And third, according to Chinese understanding, we believe these bilateral relationships, especially US-China relationships in the period of first 10 years of the end of Cold War, should be developed in such kind of ways that the United States and China develop their bilateral relationships mainly based on the guiding principles of so-called comparative advantages, in which means where the United States enjoyed advantages on the capital and innovations, and China enjoyed advantages, comparative advantages on the industry, the labor forces, the human resources, then the United States and China can launch lots of effective cooperations, very widely spread from the trade, investment, technical innovations, and even in the lots of fields of global, so-called global governance. Such kind of cooperations may be that equal. Maybe United States enjoy more advantages, but China and maybe the world can get benefits from such kind of bilateral relationships. So from China's side, we feel a little bit confused, sometimes frustrated. It seems that just in one night, the United States suddenly changed all its policy and strategies to China. So to China's side, we believe we already sending our goodwillness by using a very benign rhetoric to describe United States behavior and policy and strategies in the world since we improve our relationship in early of 1970s. Nowadays, China still try to avoid use those very traditional Cold War style rhetoric to describe the United States or to simply define the United States as kind of threat to the world. We try to focus on detailed policies and the detailed strategies so that the main purpose is we want to take a quite responsible attitude to dealing with these bilateral relationships, which we believe is the most important bilateral relationships towards stability, peace, and development, not in today, but in the foreseeable future.
Yeah, it is. I'm alarmed by what I've seen as both the behavior of our politicians and the rhetoric and even the commentary that's coming out from some senior military officials. So, I'm sure you recall I think it was the deputy commander, if not the commander of what we call Indo-PACOM, that last year it was saying, oh yeah, we're going to be at war with China by 2025. China's not out invading the Philippines. China's not out invading Singapore and Thailand. China is not fighting a war in Vietnam now. We did that far longer than you guys did. Yours was a brief conflict. And then on top of it, this I guess the role of Taiwan as a major producer with NVIDIA of computer chips and the role they play within the defense industry in the United States. And then the different congressional delegations that feel that they have to go to Taiwan. And despite the initial agreement of Kissinger and Nixon to recognize a one China policy, the United States is now talking to China. And I see this as provocative on our part without cause. Is that how the Chinese view it as well, or is it viewed in even a more serious fashion?
Yeah, I think we take a more serious understanding on these things. In my personal opinions, I believe that U.S. behaviors is very provocative policies, especially the United States withdrawal from its traditional one China policies or one China strategies created by Kissinger and Nixon in 1970s. You can explain that change in the framework named preventive actions triggered by the failure of a foreign hegemony. The United States is concerned with development of China in general ways, especially the growing up of the GDP, the general economic size, raise those challenges toward the United States. From China's point of view, the fact is we have so huge number of populations. If you're talking about the GDP per capita, if Chinese peoples want to enjoy about 50% of the US GDP per capita, our total GDP amount will be 2 times or 3 times as much as of the United States, which means that make China face a very tough challenges. We need to develop our economies. But such kind of development will not leading to an inevitable over-project our force and so-called compete with hegemonies with the United States in the world stages. We always focusing on internal development. The main purpose is to ensure that the good livings improve about the living standards of Chinese normal peoples. And in the national security issues, just like more and more people mentioned, in the 5 permanent members of UN Security Councils, China is the only country that did not finalization its reunification. We still have this Taiwan province. It's a living questions produced by the US interventions in China's liberation process. Our domestic conflict when KMT was defeated and withdrew from mainland to Taiwan, the United States just sent its fleet and say, hey, you guys, you cannot cross this strait. And then we have this province. So to China, we try to fix these issues in a peaceful ways. But from China's perspective, the most tough challenges and the most serious threat from United States is United States just continuing sending these signals that United States will not support the peaceful reunification. You just use these terms like peaceful resolutions and refuse to support China's peaceful reunifications in lots of names. And also, you're continually sending huge numbers of these missed signals to those pro-independence forces inside that island. That raised tough challenges and threats to China. But I think the situation is quite confused sometimes for China to make China to find out which is the real purpose of United States on these issues. On one side, United States did a lot of things to make China to believe that United States tried to avoid direct military conflict with the United States in this Taiwan Strait. On the other side, simultaneously, when you make some promise, for example, when Biden and Ms. Xi Jinping met in San Francisco last year, Biden said that I will not support Taiwan independence. And of course, Xi Jinping asked him, said, okay, if you agree not support this so-called Taiwan independence, you need to make your promise more clear by doing 2 things. The first, say that you're supporting the peaceful reunification. And the second, stop selling these arms to Taiwan. But in other side, simultaneously, the United States, just after this summit, they selling Taiwan new arms. Now, such kind of selling of the arms, you will find the sale of these arms become mainly a kind of signal sendings, just providing them some very blurred information, make them have a misunderstanding of what U.S. real policy is. That will trigger an increasement of the potentiality that we will have a directly military conflict in this strait. Frankly speaking, according to my personal opinions, if the United States really want to have peaceful relations with China, to deal with China in a peaceful ways, the only thing you need to do is say that United States support the peaceful reunification and just halt the military sending to Taiwan island. And just in one night, Trump said that he can solve this Ukraine and Russia conflict in 1 week. I don't believe that will happen. But in one night, if the United States saying these things and take that seriously, just in one night you can solve these problems. That will be good, not only to world, not only to China, but I think it's also very important to the development and the benefits of the United States' interest in the foreseeable futures.
Well, if China was wanting to just be provocative, it could start providing military training to Mexico and sending new weapon systems to Mexico. Then at that point, the United States go, hey, wait a second, you're interfering in our area, So here's the international rules-based order as I view it. We, the United States, we have the right to do whatever we want in Taiwan, and you have to live with it. Whereas you have no right to do anything around our borders because we don't want that. So, and other countries in the world look at us and go, those Americans are crazy. I mean, candidly, if I was a citizen of another country and had not been raised in the United States and I'm witnessing what we've been doing, I would think that the Americans have lost their minds because it doesn't appear to follow any sort of rational plan. I mean, just one quick example. Over the course of the last 30 years, the United States defense industry has become dependent upon China. China produces critical both minerals, rare earth minerals, metals, and some technologies that are essential in building some of the current U.S. weaponry. And so what's our response? To insult China and to actually treat China as a potential enemy, which I think if we do that, then if I'm the Chinese, I mean, if I'm you getting treated like that, I'd say, hey, you're not getting access to this stuff anymore. We're cutting you off. You're done. So, I mean, it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And so I can understand if I'm in your shoes looking back at the United States, trying to figure out what are they doing and why are they doing this? You're approaching it as a rational, intelligent person, thinking that there's sort of cause and effect. I don't think we've thought it out at all. I don't see any plan. I think it's just maybe a symptom of the breakdown of our society.
Yeah, I think that's frustrating me the most. What you're saying is any peoples with normal rationalities and the basic background knowledges of this field should say, and of course from China's side, if guys like you can got some positions inside White House, that will be proper, very good news to the future development of our bilateral relationships. But it's also confused China a lot. Why those people, either in the Congress or the White House, they just refuse to take such kind of rational attitude to have better understandings of our bilateral relationships. And there's one thing you mentioned, that actually China had those leverages represented by the so-called rare earth resources exporting, something like that. But till now, China did not doing some real revenges toward the United States by using such kind of leverages. The most pathetic part is, from China's side, we believe by cautious, by make some self-restraint, not to use such kind of leverages to launch retaliations toward the United States, will become the evidence of the China's good willingness to protect our bilateral relationships. But such kind of signals will never be explained or accepted by the decision makers in DC. They will transfer China's self-restraint as kind of signals that encourage them to enhance or increase future more sanctions toward China, because they don't care and they don't got any negative feedback, they don't have any cost. That means they can just doing according to their own willingness. That's a little pathetic.
Yeah. I think a lot of times Americans confuse patience for weakness. In other words, the same we've seen with Russia. In your judgment, how important was the start of Russia's special military operation in Ukraine and creating and strengthening the relationship with China. Because, I've argued that the U.S. policy, its animus towards Russia, has finally created that very thing that we said we didn't want to create, which was bringing Russia and China together in a relationship that was more than just being friendly neighbors, that ways that they could now integrate both economically, militarily, culturally. I'll tell you just my first visit to Moscow. I'm in the Intercontinental Hotel, which is just about a kilometer north of Red Square. And I go down for breakfast. And I walked in and I thought I was in Beijing. I was the only I was the only North American in there. Everybody else was Chinese. So I went, oh.
You know that when Biden took office in the year 2021, I believe that he made a trip to Switzerland and met with President Putin there with a dialogue to improve these bilateral relationships. At that time, in Chinese social medias, there's a huge wave that thousands, tens of thousands, or even millions. The social media blogs say that will be a diplomatic disaster to China because President Biden will duplicate Nixon's strategies in 1970s. But this time, China will be the Soviet Union's and Russia will be China, which means that Biden will shake hands with Putin, and Putin already prepared to sell out China at any cost. And then these US and Russia will improve their relationships, and then during these new Three Kingdom games, China will be the only enemies, and the US and Russia will become friends. But you will think that it's very ironic. At that time, US and Russia did not improve their relationship because they have a problem of Crimea. And Putin's requirement to improve this bilateral relationship is nothing more than lift up all the financial sanctions United States and the Western countries produced after the Crimea crisis. But Biden did not do that. He just encouraged Ukraine to continue lots of provocation actions toward the Russian side, and finally leading to this so-called special military operation happened. And after that special military operation happened, you will find the United States continue to doing this a very interesting policies. I don't know how to explain it. On one side, the United States raised tough pressures for China. He said that China, you should join us to jointly sanction Russia. And on the other side, the United States said that while at the same time, United States will continue all the tariff, the technical export limitations, and the sanction toward China never changed. Mm-hmm. So for China to say that, what do you mean? If I join your sanctions, what benefit I can get? It's very rational dialogue between the international relations. Yeah. You ask me something and then you give me some benefit. We make a deal, a kind of trade. He said that no, nothing. And even I will not praise you because if you join these section teams, it's all my victories. It's not your wellness or it's your friendship to me. You owe me some things. You must do according to what I say. It's make Chinese people feel odd. It's very weird. I just come back from St. Petersburg and joined the St. Petersburg International Conference there when Putin delivered 2 hours lectures. You will find that Putin is ready to sit down with the United States to have a peaceful dialogue on these Ukraine issues at any moment. The only requirement is that you agree all the territories occupied or controlled belong to the Russians. And if the United States agree that requirements, then Russia is very willing to launch any kind of cooperations with the United States. But the United States just say no. So nowadays, China and Russia, yes, I agree with your point of views. It was the United States make a mission impossible to become realized. That is, United States coerced, pushed, and forced China and Russia to go closer and build a direct, very robust, concrete economic cooperations, or that's a kind of comprehensive cooperation. Such kind of comprehensive cooperation is produced rather, frankly speaking, is more produced by the United States rather than by China and Russia aside. So I don't know why. I also cannot understand why United States would prefer such kind of strategy. Maybe in a joke, we can say that US believe that either China and Russia is only a piece of cake, small challenges to United States. As a superpowers, United States must be qualified to suffer more challenges. So just to level up the difficulties. I don't know why. I cannot understand why US takes such kind of very weird strategies to dealing with these China and Russia relationships simultaneously.
Watching the development of the relationship between Moscow and Beijing over the last year and a half, and then in conjunction with BRICS, part of me says, why didn't they do this earlier? In other words, what kept China and Russia from coming together in this cooperative relationship? Because it's not like you're natural enemies, number one. And it's not like you've been competitors against each other. It looks like it's very much a natural union. It is a kind of thing that's both mutually beneficial for both the Russians and the Chinese. And the back of my mind, I said, boy, why didn't they start doing this 20 years ago? Maybe the conditions just weren't right, but I think the union of Russia and China represent a potential to really alter the course of the world, but in a good way, not in a bad way.
Yeah, I think that we have a different Russia and China relationships in today's world, especially after the situation changed in Ukraine areas. Frankly speaking, I agree with your point. Nowadays, Russia and China, their cooperations represent not only their own interest, but also represent those interests from either the global south, the developing countries, the newly emerging market in the Middle East, or all countries, even some countries inside the European Unions and so on. It reflects those countries who want to change their policy attention or focus back to the sustainable development, to improve their economic behaviors and development, to improve their people's living standard and so on, which means for those countries who want more development issues rather than the great power competition issues. The first. And the second, United States set a very negative examples. It not only act as a hegemonies, but also act as kind of incapable hegemonies. It's not only bad, it's sometimes stupid. It's always doing those very foolish policies. During such kind of policies, no one, including United States itself, can get really benefits. That make other countries feel very weird. Sometimes, if you take those self-centered, self-interest policies, which make other people feel you are bad, but you are very smart or capable bad guys. Okay, sometimes we all accept that realities because we live in the real world. But nowadays, it's you, United States, you keep the so-called first priorities at the first positions of these world systems. And you nowadays, you're preferring to speaking to other people, say, hey, your good livings is mainly based on the world orders I created several decades ago. And you owe me this so-called the better lives. But while as simultaneously, United States just doing those very stupid policies. And such kind of policies have nothing but make the total world to become a mess. And that make other people have some new thinkings. Maybe it's a proper time that we need to have a more practical discussion and cooperations to finding out whether we can improving our lives or relations and make this world better without the interventions of the United States. I don't think that fit
Right.
for the either short terms or long terms U.S. interest. But I have to say, only if the decision makers inside the United States to stop doing these stupid things and try to make their brains back to the normal tracks. Otherwise, you will see that these things just going on to that directions. And definitely nowadays, China and Russia are already finding that our two countries, we can have more effective and mutual beneficial cooperation models. And such kind of cooperations, even if we don't talking about what happened in the Ukraine, you will find that the Chinese banks and companies did not want to touch that part a lot. But beside that, we really can create more economic benefits, not only to peoples in our two countries, but to peoples all around the world. And then we just will continue, not only in the bilateral framework, but also inside the framework of the BRICS, inside the frameworks and the platforms of the United Nations and so on.
You know, sort of the other irony here is the sort of the defining event of the 20th century was World War II. And the two countries that suffered the most casualties, suffered the most loss, were China and Russia. I think of all the, they always talk about 55 million dead globally. And of that, Russia and China, I think combined counted for well over 50% of that. It's understandable why that war has left an impression on both cultures, both societies. Let me ask you, did you get a chance to watch the debate Thursday night between Joe Biden and Donald Trump?
Of course, I watched the whole debate for that 90 minutes.
Okay. Were you scared to death, or what? What was your reaction?
I laughed to death. I laughed my ass off. I have to say that. That's inside China. We just to watch a huge online joke. It's a very ironic joke. No one can imagine that it really happens. I highly agree with Jon Stewart. After he watched that debate, he make his program say that should not be United States. So at the same time, I already produced several videos to say my comments and understanding on these things. This video debate between Biden and Trump triggered huge discuss and debate in Chinese social medias. Of course, there's a lot of joking or laughing on that part, focus on those very detailed, fragmented informations. But generally speaking, most of these discussions, rationally speaking, they feel a little bit pathetic of the United States. As I research on these international relations, I'd like to have a stronger U.S. to respect competitors. But such kind of United States just make me a little bit feel frustrated, pathetic. I don't know how to describe my feelings. It's quite complex. And also, I'd say that just to mention me, there's a term named political decay. It first was introduced by Professor Samuel Huntington in his book, The Political Orders in the Changing Societies in 1970s. Mm-hmm. And then used by his student, Professor Fukuyama, in the year maybe 12 or 2014, in his book to describe the potential crisis and threat inside the United States to its future positions in the world. He said that by lost the government or state capacities, by incapable to providing or deliver effective public policies, the United States face a kind of political decay. And those situations in US rhetoric, those phenomena would only happen in the third world countries, now will happen inside the United States. And during that debate, I have very deep impressed by Trump saying to Biden, say that in your governance, United States become more like a developing countries. It's quite ironic because both these two guys, especially Trump, make the first and make the most important movement toward that directions. And of course, Biden increasing more. And nowadays, we concern who will be the proper guys to be elected as the president of the United States in 2024. You know, when we reading those democratic theory textbook in our universities, especially those United States political theory, they told me the United States has a perfect institutional design. So either one can be selected as the president, even a dog, because nothing he can do to beyond the design of these institutions. But nowadays we find out that president is very important. You need to have a proper leaders. This proper leader, and of course, you are not only need one president, you need a couple of guys to replace most peoples inside DC, especially in White House and the Hills, so that you will have a more normalized brain, more normalized decision-making institutions. I think it's not only one or two guys can solve these issues. You need a kind of rebirth of this U.S. I don't know how to realize that, but such kind of debate make me a little nervous or anxieties, especially when you remember that this guy, any of these guys, will control the biggest nuclear arsenals in the world and will control the biggest, the most powerful conventional forces in the world. That will be a real threat.
I'm a big advocate for peace.
Yeah, me too.
What just frightens me is that the lack of leadership that you point out, that's not evident at the top of the United States, is allowing the forces to drive the United States into confrontations with countries around the world. And instead of making the world better, we're making the world worse. And I've got to figure out how to reverse that. I thank you for your courtesy and listening to me, and thank you for sharing your thoughts.
My pleasure.
This was, for me, a very productive hour. Thank you.
Thank you so much.